It
It
is
is
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Whoa. Oh, it's Tuesday. Hello. Welcome. I sound so dejected. I
You do.
I do. You know what? It's 7:30 in the morning.
Mm.
Um could you imagine if we actually recorded these like earlier than this? I couldn't possibly, my voice just doesn't, it's like hello. Uh this early. But it's 7:30 in the morning and we've had, like, my goodness, it has been a whirlwind, and
Yeah,
I
it
want to
has.
talk about one particular whirlwind for you. For those of you who are just joining us, Raquel has been in Tanzania recently, and finishing, a master's is no easy. Starting a master's, anything to do with a master's is not an easy task. So as we've been doing these episodes, Raquel has been chipping away with a pickaxe at her master's. And I asked last week or the week before if we could sit down and actually have a conversation about Tanzania, because number one, you had said to me, I can't answer how was it in more than in less than 45 minutes. So I was like, well, I'm not going to sit here for 45 minutes listening to you unless we put it on a podcast. We have to be efficient with our time. And number two, I think the thing that I was really excited to talk about was something that came up in a conversation, which was purposeful impact making while
Mm.
continuing to honor tradition. So I guess this is the time that Raquel didn't actually see the script because she wanted to let me be the interviewer. Great choice from about 7:30 in the morning. Uh, but let's as in Raquel's word, let's just dig straight in. You just came back from Tanzania. You have a fresh perspective on what it means to actually create a meaningful impact or inspire a meaningful impact. Uh, so first off, can you outline what was your intention before you left? What did you want to achieve before you
Mhm.
left? With blank slate Raquel, we'll
Yeah,
call her that.
blank slate. I hope I wasn't that blank of a slate, but there was something there. Okay, so I think in order to answer that question, I have to go back to talking about what my master's is about. So I'm doing a Master of Science in Persuasive Communications, and I'm specializing in health communications. What you do in this area of work is you're oftentimes working with different health professionals. It could be kind of public health, it could be hospitals, something along those lines. It could be not for profit, and you're basically trying to create healthy change. That really is interesting because if you think about blanket statements and blanket campaigns, they're going to hit for some people and they're not for others. I mean, I think a really trendy term over the last couple of years has been like your lived experience. So, different people have different lived experiences. They grow up with different cultures in different areas with different wealth and different parenting styles. And all of this accumulates and brings together different personalities. And that's why you see some groups of people who are pro vaccination and other groups who are terrified of vaccination and everything in between. Um, so for me, growing up in Vancouver, which is really health conscious, I remember my first job in kind of like the health not for profit scene, and it was the Canadian Men's Health Foundation. And I was like always telling people how healthy Canada is, blah, blah, blah. And then through this job, I actually had access to all of the statistics on people's weights and people's health and their BMI across the country, and my jaw dropped. We were so much more unhealthy than I realized. I just happened to live in a very health conscious area, and that was my lived experience. And so I had been painting our whole country with this idea that we were all overall like very, very healthy. So that was many, many years ago, like over, I don't know, I want to age myself. Let's say a decade ago.
Why don't you want to age yourself? That's a
That's
different
a
conversation.
new conversation, yeah.
Just bring out the Dusty Bones episode.
That's right. I put my hairband on for a reason. Um,
So sorry, you were talking about the difference between what I heard as health culture and your own health consciousness.
I think no, it was just a misunderstanding. Like I was looking at my lived experience and painting
Yeah.
our country with it. And
Yeah.
it was incorrect. It was maybe correct from a community, but it definitely wasn't correct outside of that. And that's how most people
Mm.
think. And this was like
Mhm.
really early on in my career. So now doing my master's in, I mean, it's a master's of science. So I'm looking at empirical research for all of the stuff that I'm doing. It gives you a really different view of what's going on. You start to get a better idea of how everything works, how different people are, how different people change their minds about things, and why people won't change their minds about certain things.
And when you're doing that, when you talk about this empirical data, I never know how I say that word. Like
It's both, I
it
think. It's potato,
genuinely
potato.
changes. Whenever I narrate audiobooks, I'm like, what accent is what is normal? My question on the empirical data side is now it's just really going to screw me up every time. On the empirical numbers side, numberings, the metrics. Anyway, what is that specific to a certain culture? Like, how did you in your masters? Like, how did you decide? Okay, how are you going to look at the statistics? Like, what are they statistics of the world? Are they like how
Okay,
focused
okay.
are
So
you?
bear with me. So that idea kind of crept along with me and it
Okay.
frustrated me. I felt like I didn't have enough world experience. I'd traveled and stuff, but I felt like there was a lot of lack of worldly experience for me to be doing a job where I'm doing health communications, where I have
Mm,
to talk to everybody from all different cultures. And I think that like 10 years ago or so was when I really started getting super excited about learning about different cultures around the world. I was
mm,
very lucky. I lived in a very multicultural area, but I just got that hunger and drive even more. So
mm,
fast forward to when I was now doing my thesis for my master's, I knew I wanted to go in a new place of the world where I've never been before that was very culturally different because I wanted to be able to learn at the same time that I was doing the intervention and my thesis. So, yes, I'm checking these boxes, I'm doing the tasks,
mm.
but because I had this year and a half off from work, most of the time, um, ish.
Ish.
I needed to use every opportunity I could, and this was such a big opportunity for me to learn something very different, and so that's why I chose to go to Tanzania. As far as the so empirical research, basically all that means is that it's looked at scientifically. So you're using a group of people. Usually you want to have, I mean, a great study is like 1,000 people. A good study you could have about 100 people.
Mm.
um, and you're looking at how you're measuring how everything is working. um, in the social sciences, it's very, very, very complex because humans are very, very, very complex. So you can't have data that's so precise like in a clinic. In a clinic, you can measure things that are numbers, right? You can say, okay, they took one pill and their blood pressure went down. They took two pills and their blood pressure went more down. That's really easy. But in in social sciences, a lot of times we're measuring things that we call latent. It's like a latent scale or a latent idea, and that's essentially not something you can apply a number to. So, on a political scale, are you more liberal? Are you more conservative? That's not something that can just be measured by somebody. It's
Right.
not possible. We can't trust that measurement. So then what happens is they create a scale made out of, let's say, 7 or 8 questions, sometimes many, many more. And they make that scale. People answer each question, and each one is basically a piece of that answer. And then they do some math with it. I'm not going to dig in or it's going to become a math lesson, but they put it all together and they say, okay, is this a validated scale? And then when scales are validated, you're okay to use them. So those pieces of research are oftentimes done, I would say, in first world countries. They're oftentimes done where the universities are that do this kind of research. So, here in the Netherlands, we have one of the, I think it's actually the world's top research facility for communication science. So you have a lot of Dutch studies coming out. But of course, then you have a bias and a lean towards a Dutch mentality and a Dutch
Right.
culture. So this is why I think it's also very, very important to take studies further out and start looking at them and applying them to different countries and cultures and areas and ideas and income brackets.
We had such an interesting conversation a while back with Dr. Ashley Margerson on
Mm-hmm.
the studies that were created on, what was it? I think it was like body mass index. Um,
Mm.
she talked about and various studies that were based on white men, basically,
Yeah.
that was then dictating how people across all cultures should, like, quote unquote, behave and what their appropriate body mass index or you know measurements or anything, what their data should look like, which is
Mm-hmm.
which is, I think I'm now understanding a little bit more of finally what you did for the last year and what you were studying. Like, get on this podcast, we've got to do a thing, I don't care about your masters right now. But
What
apparently
thesis?
she's doing important stuff. So, okay, great. So thanks for like giving me that outline. And then just specifically, why did you choose Tanzania and the Maasai? The Maasai people, the Maasai culture was some where you went eventually, and you'd wanted to do that very strongly. That was, you were your
Mhm.
typical Raquel about it. It was like boom, and then just beeline, and then all of a sudden you're just gone.
I have to work quickly or people try to change my mind. So I make a decision and I run for it and I just make it so that, like the tickets are booked and nobody can sway me otherwise.
I think I'm gonna do
Um,
that. I'm gonna do
yeah.
that to you.
Yeah, do it to me.
I'm gonna be like, this is what's happening now. Whoop, I'm gone.
This thing and it's starting today.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in Amsterdam, outside your place. I'm here
That
now.
would be fun. That
Oh
would
my
be really
gosh, you would be like, oh. Anyway, please continue.
fun. Okay, why did I choose Tanzania? I had a lot of questions about why I chose Tanzania. Um, Actually, I looked at a whole bunch of different countries. I looked at different cultural things that were going on. I was also looking at, so basically, there's two sides to it. When I was researching for months. I don't want to name how many months, many months, many of the months I was researching. And I was looking at research that existed already in communication science. And I was also looking at, volunteer places. So where would I actually want to volunteer? Where am I okay going? Do I think that these volunteer places are legit? And actually, funny story, I did originally apply to a different volunteer place, paid my deposit, and then was like, this person is so sketchy. I ended up rescinding my application, lost my deposit, which I was okay with. I was like, I'm not going there. And then I found this one. And at that point, it was like so far in. I think it was like a month until I left. And I was like, I can't not be in Tanzania because I've done months of research saying Tanzania is the place I'm going to go. Um, but to be honest, when I was reading about it, something just struck home. There was something that intrigued me, especially there were two major issues going on that really hit my heartstrings. Um, one of them was, so both of them actually came down to gender norms. And the research I did this time, I really, 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 really wanted to put gender norms as part of it, but I needed more time to do that. So it kind of would have rolled into almost PhD level thesis. And I was like, okay, I don't have the time to
See
be
how
able to
she's
do this.
See how she's priming me? I just want to put a bold underline italicize
We'll
statement
just bookmark
in.
this as like the
Just
time
this
Raquel.
was the moment that Raquel started Professor Xing again before taking on a doctorate. You think I don't know what's happening, but I'm right here. I know. I have also done a by association persuasive masters.
By association.
Yeah,
We're just planting seeds. We're just planting seeds.
there's no we here. I I am the dirt soil that you're like
The
pooh
dirt
pooh.
soil.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm like, what's growing out of here? I didn't see that. Oh, I did see that coming. Oh yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
Yeah,
Anyway,
but I mean, it would have been a much bigger project. And so I went back and forth with my thesis supervisor, and she's like, yeah, I think it's complex enough what you're doing. Let's leave this for now. But what did strike me was that there were these gender norms issues. I hate calling them issues, but it kind of is. So, one that I was really, really interested in researching, but it was so delicate, was spousal abuse. There's a very, very, very high level of spousal abuse in Tanzania. And this is something that just, I don't know, just struck such a chord with me. And I was thinking about like, how could communications help? How could a level of intervention help people in a country like this? So we know that the laws say this is illegal, and yet the numbers are through the roof. And what is it that's actually stopping this? And what is it that could actually help this? And yeah, so that was something that I was really, really interested in. But again, it was going to be so, so, so delicate. The other side was the nutrition. And again, this actually has to do with gender norms, because what they were finding is women and children had far worse nutrition than men in Tanzania. So malnutrition was much, much higher in women and children. The reason this has to do with gender norms is because culturally, men eat first. So they eat everything that they want to eat, and the protein usually goes to the man because the protein is more costly, and the man is like the head of the household, and thus everything goes to him. Next goes in line from age. So let's say, depending on how big their family is, then maybe the women get to eat something. But oftentimes there is no protein in that anymore. And oftentimes, if the men are eating, they'll eat the protein on their own if it's a group of them. And then it trickles down to the youngest kids at the end. So you're seeing huge levels of stunting. You're seeing huge levels of malnutrition in kids. And it's very backwards to how we think in Western society. It's like, always feed the kids first, always help the
uh,
kids first.
that's a really interesting point.
Yes.
I just want to interject there because like, I wonder if that, because it's in, I don't know if Western, like my dad has told me about stories where, you know, you have a similar pecking order, I guess, for lack of a better
Mm.
word, because the man or is the one that needs that protein to go out do the hunt. Like this is like, sounds like a hunter
But it's
mentality.
not. The women are working. The women are physically
Oh,
working.
okay.
The women are at the quarries. We were seeing women at quarries who are, oh my gosh, it was terrifying. I mean, they're in these massive, massive pits, and they are chiseling stairs up. I don't even know. It was like, I don't want to say anything incorrect, but I want to say like maybe 3 to 4 stories high, and they're hand chiseling the stairs that they're walking up as they're filling buckets full of this soil. And this is the manual labor they're doing with like
Wow.
very high levels of anemia, very high levels of a lack of protein. a lack of nutrient diversity. And
And
so we
that,
know the women are working physically.
right.
We know, that but they're still not eating to power that physical work. Um, yeah, it's just it's a gender norm. It is a pecking order, like what you were saying. It's
Mm,
definitely a pecking order, but it doesn't, maybe once upon a time
yeah.
it had something to do with hunting, but the Maasai are not hunters. The Maasai were not hunters. I
Gatherers?
think they're called no, I think they're called naturalists. I think that is I don't want to mess up that term, but um so they're farmers, but they're nomadic farmers. So they would have sheep and cows and things like that. And still to this day, some of them are now, they call them the modern Maasai. So they have created, spaces where they live all year round. But many of them are still nomadic, and they travel through many countries actually.
I did a very quick, just a quick wiki, and they say they're a Nilotic ethnic group inhabiting northern, central, and southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, among the
Mm-hmm.
best known local populations internationally due to their residence near the many game parks of the African Great Lakes and their distinctive customs and dress. They speak the
Mm-hmm.
Ma language, a member of the Nilotic language family that's related to the Dinka, Kalenjin, and newer languages. Except for some elders living in rural areas, most Maasai people speak the official languages of Kenya and Tanzania, Swahili and English, and reported as numbering over a million, 1,189,522 in Kenya. Um, yeah, and did you say that they're very very strict on their cultural systems?
Yes, they
Like,
have a
okay.
very, very, very strong ancient culture, which is super cool. Um, I mean, anyone who is, yeah, who's international, like if you're living in a country that's different from the one you were born in, it's so easy to and quick to lose culture, to change to the place that you're in. And it's really incredible to see a culture like theirs that is so strong. And it's true, you do know instantly from looking at them that they are Maasai. You do know um, from their practices, like they're very, very strict in their practices. There are downfalls to that. There are downfalls because some of these ancient practices really, really, really harm women. So they do practice female genital mutilation, majority of them. It has been outlawed in Tanzania for about 12 years. I think it was 2008 when they outlawed it. But it is still, we know it's still happening a lot. They just have kind of found ways to hide it better. And, um, a lot of their medical needs, because they're living in villages that are quite far from town and it's very hard to get to town. Um, a lot of their medical needs go to an elder, and sometimes those elders are not, and most of the time, they're not educated in uh, medicine. So the things that they're practicing can be very harmful. I remember a friend of mine was working at a hospital in Tanzania, and they had a little girl who had had diarrhea for I think 2 weeks, which is really, really bad. That's you cannot let a child go. I don't think anyone should go with diarrhea for that long. Especially when there's rampant dehydration there. So they said to them that they had brought her in like 4 times to the hospital. And they're like, really? Like, are you sure? Because they should have held this child. Like, had you come, this child should not be allowed to go home now. And they're like, no, no, we've been here like 4 times, nothing's working. And then a few days later, it came out that they had actually been to a healer, like an elder healer, but they had burned the roots of the teeth on in the gums. They had burned all of her baby teeth on the inside of her mouth. And their idea was by burning the roots of these teeth, they would get rid of the diarrhea. So, yeah. And this little girl had literally gray ash, like holes burned into all of her teeth. So, you see practices like this and you're like, okay, this is this is not okay. This needs to change. But then you see this beautiful ancient culture, you see them dance and the joy and just the, I don't think there's a word for it, at least not one that I know, but just the light that exudes from them when they're dancing to their like cultural songs. And it's absolutely beautiful. The connection that they have with each other is amazing. Um, there is so much that is so cool about their culture, and yet there are things that are so dangerous about their culture. And
And
I,
I think that's
yeah.
quite it would be so interesting to I coming from a place like Hong Kong, and there's a lot in every culture that you're from, in every culture you look at. But when I remember when I was actually living in England, I'd moved to England at this point, and I first like visited North America, and I was like, what is happening in this culture that you have these giant plates of food? You have,
Mm-hmm.
I remember driving past someone at a petrol station. Um, uh, you call it a gas stop here. But driving past, and this person was, I now know to realize that there are a lot of different factors that can contribute to weight gain, but this person was so incredibly large.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just not been exposed as someone from, a very different climate, a very different culture, um, to that being the norm. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I totally hear you when it's like, these are very, very shocking things. And I want to encourage people to, and I take it, I know that it's so complicated, but it also happens like it happens everywhere. Every single culture has a
Mm-hmm.
different thing that you're like, this is not healthy. I mean, we're just starting to talk about mental health here, and we have so much abundance in this part of the world. We're just starting to, Jamie Oliver in England like fought for school dinners to be different because the nutrition levels were just, you know
Mm-hmm.
atrocious. um but yeah, but I hear you, and that is it's a very shocking, it must have been a very shocking reality to arrive at for you. I mean, I don't know how much you knew about them already before.
I mean, I did months and months and months of research. So I think I was pretty prepared. There's always things that shock you. I
Mm.
mean, yeah. So in the end, of course I did my thesis stuff, which was the nutrition side. So I think I did nutrition training for over 150 Maasai women from three different areas of Arusha, Tanzania. I took about 60 of those and I did habit training with them. Um, and then I worked with about 200 girls, school aged girls in Tanzania to teach about menstruation, to teach about sexual health, to teach about hygiene. Female genital mutilation was a huge topic. So we went in 3 or 4 different times to different schools. And we also taught boys as well. So we taught boys all of these different things as well. And so that was about 400. So 400 girls and boys that were school aged. And that was the shocking part. The women I had researched, the nutrition I had researched, like this type of stuff. Okay, I had researched this. I understood it, and yeah, I did many months of research, so I was pretty well equipped. There's there are things that you can hear, and there are things that people can tell you are the truth that you truly don't understand until you're in that setting. And I remember talking about sex ed with a class. And first of all, it's like actually so hilarious because I'm that person that like if someone says penis, I'm like and now I had to be the one talking about all the different body parts. And there were moments in that class that just killed me. Oh my gosh, I just died. I remember this one boy, I was pointing to clitoris and I was like, does anyone know what this is? And this one boy, like this tiny guy, he like puts up his hand and he's like giggling away and so we're like, okay, yes, you, and I have a translator, so my translator is like listening to him, and my translator kind of looks at me and looks back at the kid and asks another question. I'm like, no, just tell me, what is he saying? And he looks at me again, like he doesn't want to tell me what this kid is saying. I'm like, so what is he saying? He's like, he says it's a bean. I had to laugh so hard. I was like, I mean, we do kind of have like a phrase in English that it's not totally wrong.
It's not completely incorrect.
So that was quite hilarious. I loved this group so much. But you know, I had this kind of feeling the first time that I worked with them. This was like the second or third time. So they were really out there by then. They knew me. They were like, this girl, I know her. She's a safe one to talk to. But the first time I went there, they were a lot more reserved, a lot more held back. And we had like one or two kids that were just always, you know, those keeners, like hands straight up in the air, and they're ready to answer every question. And they're very cute. They like stand up at their desk to tell you the answers, which I don't know if that was the same in Hong Kong, but we definitely didn't do that in Canada. So it was very, very cute. But I had this feeling, we're talking about sex ed, and this was the one time I had to develop talking points that were not my own. So it was requested of me, can you talk about family planning? I said, well, what do you mean family planning? Well, stop girls from having early age pregnancies. And I said, okay, so, but you do know like rape happens, right? Yeah, we know rape happens. It happens a lot in these areas. I'm like, okay. So by family planning, do you mean contraception? Because if they're on contraception, at the very least, like, you know, then they're not getting pregnant, because if you get pregnant in Tanzania, you no longer can go to school. And oftentimes your family will disown you. So this is a very big issue for young women if they do get pregnant. Um, and they're saying like, no, they can't. And I said, why can't they? Oh, because sex is illegal until you're 18 in Tanzania. And I said, but again, there's rape happening. Yes, we know, but that's illegal too. And I said, okay, but if we look at the statistics, like rape is happening a lot. And he said, yes, I know. And I said, okay, but then are the jails very, very full? Because like what's happening to all these rapists then? Everything's illegal. And at the end of the day, it was like almost everything was 30 years in prison. If you have sex under 18, it's 30 years in prison. If you rape someone, it's 30 years in prison. If you have sex under 18, then it's considered rape. And then all of these things were like, everything was 30 years in prison. So at the end of the day, we're doing this training. And you know me, I'm not very good at selling things I don't believe in. I'm not that person. And I'm not really understanding what they want me to do, because I'm like, I feel like you're just asking me to tell these girls that they're fucked. Like, I'm sorry, but they're just kind of fucked. Like, don't have sex, correct, say that you don't want to have sex, get raped, but don't do this and don't do that and don't tell anyone because it'll be your fault. Like, it was just really crazy to me. So at the end, I'm asking them questions like, okay, so does anyone know what contraception is? And the girl like puts up her hand, she sits up and she's like, contraception is something you should only use when you're married. And I'm like, okay, but do you know what it is? And they're just like crickets. Like nobody and then finally like condoms. Okay, cool. Yes, we know condoms. So condoms were well discussed. They clearly knew what these were. They knew that it helped with STDs. This was something people have discussed with them, which is good. So that made me feel better. Most of the other contraceptions they didn't know. And by the end of this discussion, I was like, do they know what sex is? Or is sex just this like airy fairy concept of something you should not do and one day you will and you could get diseases from it? Like I felt like the actual function of sex they didn't understand. And so I ended up asking them, they didn't understand. So I did come back to do a training on, that's when I started doing sex education for them. But it was just so insane to me that this was so heavily talked about. It was so taboo. It was so drilled into them not to do it, but they really were so innocent in the sense that they didn't understand what it was. And so then I thought, you know what, I had this gut feeling I need to take this a step further. We need to talk about rape. It's like, what is rape? Okay, rape is illegal. Great. Everyone knows it's illegal. 30 years in prison. Everyone knows there's 30 years in prison. So I say, okay, girls, like, if a guy wants to have sex with you, what do you say? And they're like, oh, I tell him that I need to go to school because I need to support my parents and this and that. And yeah, that was my faith. I was like, oh, okay. Or you just say no. You just no, I don't want to have sex with you. And then if they keep pushing, you need to call it what it is. Say the word, that is rape. Make sure they know what they're doing is rape. So we discussed about that, calling things what they were, saying the names. And then I asked the boys, I said, okay, great. So when a girl says no, you, and this kid's like, hand straight up. He was the keener, answering everything. And he says, you use force. And I said, I'm sorry. And this is being translated to me. So I was like, are you translating wrong? Because sometimes there are translation barriers and language barriers. And so I was like, do you think he's misunderstanding the question? Like, he means you force it to stop, right? Like, and so he asked the kid again, and the kid explains in a different way. No, you use lots of energy, you use lots of force, and you make it happen. And I was like, oh, that's rape. So this is the same kid who is saying how bad rape is. That's 30 years in prison, and he doesn't understand that forcing someone to have sex with him is rape. Like, it's just, those were the moments where I just was like, okay, like that was really eye-opening. And that's when I realized, what a different culture there was. And when we explained to him that that was rape, like, he just looked so confused. He truly, there was no laughing. He wasn't trying to be a class clown. Like, he just looked so confused. Like, how could these two things be the same? This was a grade 6 or 7. We only had grade 6 and 7s in this classroom. So that's what, like 12 or 13 years old, or 11 or 12, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Those were definitely the eye-opening moments.
And it's hard, yeah, and it's these examples are really they're they're that's one person who's speaking up, and there are always, it's not necessarily everyone that then thinks it, it's not necessarily no one that thinks it. You're all of a sudden put into a position where, I mean, I don't know about you, but I would be like, I'm not qualified to start this conversation, with someone who is an impressionable mind that we've brought in, that we've come into to have a conversation about these things. I mean, I hear what you're saying when you say, how do you explain that to someone? And you can
Yeah.
research as much as you want, but when someone looks at you and you can see their body language and you can see the earnest response,
Yeah.
and you can see that you cannot respond necessarily to someone with one sentence that's going to make them or inspire them to turn around and go, oh, okay, I get it now. Like,
Yeah. Let's not
that's
do that.
that's a
Yeah.
very that's a very complicated, and then to have to go away and think about what that statement might have done in terms of impacting others in that room, in
Yeah.
the you know how did it end? How did you wrap that one up? How did you deal with that?
So I was presenting at that point with another girl as well. For me, when I go into situations like this, my biggest thing going there was everything I was going to do, from nutrition training to female genital mutilation to rape discussions to sex education. It's a conversation. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I am from a different culture, from a different country, from a different generation, and I clearly have very different beliefs. So, my mentality about it is, and this is what I told them before every session, I am here to give you information. good information that I know is well vetted. What you do with that information is for you to decide, and this is a safe place. So there's no judgment on anything you say, and it's not going to leave this room. So this was how we caveated every single session. And so for me, I was really taken aback when I heard that. The person I was doing the intervention with, she was like, no. She just yelled out like, no, no, you don't. You say no. You let it stop. She was really, really upset about it, which is understandable. I think it can be a huge cultural shock, and it was to me too. But I needed to kind of let that marinate. So yes, we said, okay, no, this is actually what rape is. We'll come back and we'll do a further discussion on what, like, on sex education, because that made it very clear to me that they didn't understand what sex was. If they don't understand that forced sex is rape, that's very clear. So that became, okay, we need to go back. I really lobbied to go back to do sex education, to look at all of the parts of the body, because the other thing is, I did do a fundraiser when I was there. We were able to get 220 girls 2 sets of sanitary pads and underwear, because this was another really, really big thing that was affecting girls out there. And the woman that I was buying them from, she is certified by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We ended up talking for a really long time because there was a big cross-sectional of the work that we were doing. And she was telling me that she does the rape seminars as well, with kids in the Arusha area. And she was saying the number of them. With hers, she did a secret box at the end. So they explained what sex was, they explained what all these things were, they explained that it's your body and no one can touch it if you say not to, and all of that. And then at the end, they had kind of like a confessional box. If they felt like it, if they wanted to write something in there, they didn't have to name names, they could name names, but it wasn't going to leave there unless they wanted it to. And she said afterwards, her and the teacher went through these. She said like a good 2/4 of the classroom, girls and boys, had been raped or sexually molested. So this is very high numbers within the culture. We do know with girls who've hit puberty, this is also very high. So it's not unheard of. It's not like, oh, this was a random kid and it was just his idea. It is definitely cultural. And it is scary. Like, it's really scary. You start going into classrooms and you're like, also with the female genital mutilation, like, I just was looking at these girls and I'm like, this is, my outreach coordinators were telling me by grade 6 and 7, which was the ages that I started with, it's too late. Majority of those girls have already had it. So female genital mutilation is, there's technically 4 different types, but 3 different types within the Tanzania area that are more common. One version is where they cut the clitoris off, and they're also cutting parts of the labia, and they are sewing it all the way down with just a tiny, tiny hole. This, if they're going to have intercourse, if they're going to get pregnant, has to be reopened and then reshut later, which means obviously a massive amount of scar tissue. There's another one where they're cutting everything, the labia, the clitoris, and the inner areas, and then they're sewing it with a bit bigger hole. They can still be penetrated at that point, but it's going to be very painful. And then they have another one where it's just the top bit that is cut, so it's just the clitoris and the hood that's cut, and it's just sewn from the top part. So that one's not as common in Tanzania, which is it's all unfortunate, but that one would probably be the least the least amount of complications I could imagine. So these girls are dealing with like such high infection rates. They're doing these with knives that they're sharing. They're doing it sometimes with these rusty knives because it's not legal. So they're doing it in back areas, and the stuff that they're sewing them together with is just awful. Some girls do end up bleeding to death. There's so many issues around it, and it's so sad to see those numbers and enter a room physically. Like, it's sad to read about. It is so sad to read about. But to then enter the room and think like, yeah, probably at least 75% of these girls have had this, if not more, it's so disheartening. So we had a conversation with them about FGM, and I asked them, I said, okay, so let's talk about myths and facts, and let's talk about why people do it and why, people don't want people to do it. And the reasons they do it, a lot of it is marriage. It comes down to the ability to get married. Men are looking for women who've had it. It is very cultural. They feel women who've had it are above, kind of like a caste almost, above those who haven't. Some areas believe that women who haven't had it can't make sense. But the biggest reason is they truly believe, if a woman doesn't have this, if she hasn't had FGM, she will be with many, many men, that she'll just leave the man and find another man and find another man. So it really all comes down to sexual pleasure and fear of loss, fear of losing a woman. And at the end of this seminar that I gave, I was so impressed with this one class. They asked me so many questions, and really thoughtful, good questions. And the last kid, he asked me, he said, well, so you think, like, if the women, if they don't have this, like, how do we know that they won't find another man? And I was like, that's the best question I've ever heard. Like, I'm so thankful he asked that. So we discussed it. We discussed about morals, how they come from inside of us, how our decisions are our own to make, whether or not things have happened to our body. And, by doing things that are in with our values, that we grow as people, and that sexual pleasure can be felt, and you can still pick one partner. And, we had this whole lengthy discussion, but yeah, like, the things that came out of their mouths were so incredible and really thoughtful. Like, you could tell he wanted to know more. He wanted to know, like, will my wife stay with me? Which I thought was really amazing. Like, that's a true conversation.
Yeah, it's just an incredible, like, it comes, for me, it really hits home how our, culture, religion, tradition, um, society, and down to an individual level, like, education is just so important. And the tenets of, I don't know if that's the right word, but like the foundational values of existence, like, there's a lot going on in the news at the moment about freedom of, rights of your own bodily autonomy of,
Yeah.
and it's in wildly different ways, and yet it all comes down to very similar control mechanisms and fear-based decision making. um, and I think this is one of the reasons that you and I, so it's why we started the in-person brunches, were,
Yeah.
you know, let alone the podcast, which then just became a magnified version of conversations that were based on repression, one way or another, systemic,
Yeah.
bias. Uh, ugh,
Yeah.
yeah.
There were some heavy days. I'm not gonna lie. There were some days when I just came home and I was like, people were chatting in the bus or something on the way home, and I just had to throw on headphones and just kind of disconnect from the world. I was like, okay, this is
Mm.
a heavy day. I need to just sit with myself now.
I think it's really important to, and thank you for sharing all of those things, because hearing it is one thing, and being in that room is, like you say, a totally different experience. But I think what I really take away from that is, I mean, a few things actually. You talked about really making sure that you're volunteering with an organization that feels good and feels right for
Yes,
you. And
so
I,
important.
I think we need to have another conversation, actually, potentially with someone from a volunteer organization that is overseas, that could speak to, what do you do? Because I'm sure that there are so many stories of people going over to like quote unquote volunteer and help. And it's a culture you don't know, it's a place you don't know, and you don't know what you're walking into a lot of the time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so how to research, finding that and doing it safely, and having safety mechanisms in place before you go. And then the other thing is really that conversation surrounding creating a safe space with not withholding judgment, but accepting that.
I think it is withholding judgment.
I think withholding's not the word I wanted to use. I think it's allowing judgment to um, exist through your own lens of bias, and not letting it impact other people, because you want to create a safe space more than you want to pass judgment
Mm-hmm.
on someone. And I think that difference can be very difficult when you see something that is fundamentally wrong to you. It sounds like it's very easy, and I've certainly experienced it, where it's so easy to be like, why do you not understand this is not okay? Why do you not understand
Mm-hmm.
that this is not right? And obviously there are times and places where you just act. I've had moments where I just respond, um, and oh,
As have we all.
as have we all, and I think my dad said it. He says it really well. It's your rights stop when they infringe upon mine. But aside from really from that, it's a lifelong journey of being like, I have not been you, and I have not been in this culture, or I have not been in this space. Like, where is there
And
time
you're
for me to
actively
listen?
walking into it. I think that's the other thing. And I know, yeah, at the hostel that I was volunteering, or the company that I was volunteering with had two hostels. And we, along with all the other volunteers, we had this discussion a lot because there were many things that are very different to what we're used to in Western cultures. I mean, there are no gay rights there. It is illegal. There is
Mm.
no rights at all. I believe it is also 30 years in prison. Everything's 30 years in prison. I was going to get a t-shirt just like 30 years. Um, but and it's very difficult to go there and see that and
Mm.
yeah, to not impart judgment. But I think you're choosing to go to another country, and my assumption then is that you're choosing to go there also to learn, not just to quote unquote help. Because quote unquote helping is not putting on just what you think is best for them. It's sitting there and having a conversation with them to say, hey, what's your life like right now? And what do you actually need? And what's stopping you from getting there?
Mm.
Okay, let's come up with a solution together. That's
Yeah.
helping. Helping is including the person that you want to help. Helping is not putting a
Dictating.
stamp, yeah, dictating
Well,
what you
there's
think is best to
there's
someone else.
colonialism right there. Let's just open that can of worms. I mean, it's true though. You're right, and I think again, this is where, I mean, we talk about this. We go back and forth all over the place with everything we do about what is a patriarchal culture, what is a matriarchal culture.
Mhm.
what is feminine energy? What is, what what are these gender stereotypes and gender norms, and how do we normalize like quote unquote failure in the pursuit
Mm-hmm.
of mutual respect for and understanding that we're inherently symbiotic beings. We can't exist without each other and without the things around us and the people and places and spaces and elements. We're not, we're still considered as humanity, like I think overarchingly, a virus, or parasitic in nature. We
Mm.
behave very parasitically, and I think that's a really interesting way of, I've been very much going back to elements and nature, and we have so much to learn from the things around us, and there's so many parts of me that's like, we're not behaving symbiotically. And I wasn't even that good at
Mm.
science, and I remembered that term. Don't ask me maths, but symbiosis. I understand the basic concept.
I
So
feel like
yeah,
that makes sense.
I think, yeah,
That
biology,
you
no
remember
problem.
that
Yeah, yeah,
specifically.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it sounds nice to say symbiosis. And I probably heard David Attenborough in my days of training to try and be David Attenborough. Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway that I'd love for us to remember as we go into the next week, to go into the week ahead. And also look at, you said you're in another country, but I would also suggest that within in our own
Absolutely.
backyards, there's so many different cultures and traditions and systems. And this is you and I were talking about this earlier, um, for the live streams that we're doing. We you made a really good point where you were like, I don't want to just focus on our, like, quote unquote culture. And I get very nervous telling stories that aren't necessarily mine. I get very nervous about it. I don't want to offend. I don't want to, I want to manage the expectation. I don't want someone to come after me and say, you have no idea. But the reality is, I have no idea,
And isn't that beautiful?
what stops us from telling those stories is often the reactivity of people, uh, in various capacities. But if we don't do that, one thing that you've taught me a lot is, if we don't push to try and explore that, then we're not winning either. Like, there's no,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to, but again, this is where it comes down for
I
me. It
do
comes down to
agree with
words
mm,
and preparing as best you can. And like, for this example as well, as you were talking, I'm like, I am putting a trigger warning into the top of this explanation.
yeah.
Those things are the things that we have an ongoing responsibility to think about. But I think it's also really important to address that we don't always, like, there is no right to it, and there is never enough time to have all of the knowledge in the world. But there is a
But I think it's
constant,
beautiful.
I think it can be, and I think it can also really, it can really upset people. And I think that's a valid thing for us to consistently. This is why you and I work so well together, because you're like, I want to
Mm.
do this thing, and we're both inherently thoughtful, but we both go back and forth with each other to then say, okay, have we done everything we can to be respectful before we
Well, and I,
launch?
yeah, but I think, I guess my point is, I think that not knowing is beautiful. Acknowledging that you don't
Right.
know is beautiful. We are not here to tell anyone's story. I would never sit here and try to tell someone else's story. But if we're going to bring someone on and interview them and have them tell their story, that's beautiful. That's us getting to learn
Yeah.
about someone else and someone else's culture and someone else's experiences. And we keep coming back to culture, but it's just life experiences. It can be
Mm.
from anyone anywhere in the world with any background, but learning about someone else's experience, I mean, that's why I'm so obsessed with doing the podcast. Is every week we get to learn about someone new and it's exciting. And
Yep.
yeah,
And I agree. And yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think we both we do that bit pretty well. I think that's a very good point. I think there are moments. I mean, we haven't brought on someone. We haven't brought on someone that is inherently like someone I would be very, very personally triggered
nervous.
by, for example.
Ah,
Right? Yeah. Like if there was a, I'm just going to put that out there. If there was someone who was, like a white supremacist, that I'm gonna say like, and I know people who are we all know people who are racist, we all know people who,
mm-hmm.
but having really different, like for me, how I'm not sure how I I'm not sure how I could respond to that person,
Or if you
but
even want to.
well, but the reality is there are, again, there's culture, there are things around that where, that's for me the constant back and forth is me dancing that line of, not trying to, what did Story Hive call it when you have like leading questions, or you're like,
Oh yeah, of
so
course.
you're a racist. Like I'm not gonna, I can't say, but there's so much of me that is like, that has so many experiences where I'm like, I don't know that I feel safe having, like, confronting a person. No, I'm not even confronting, having, see, immediately I just led with that. I'm like, I would have to confront this person. It wouldn't, there's just, and that I have to recognize is, for better or worse, is my bias. Those people are human beings. They have like lived experience. There are things that I don't know that I don't know, and I think we can't create a symbiotic world if we try and cut off the people that aren't in our same remit. But at the same time, how do you further mutual respect, while saying, but I won't listen to you if you're racist, or I won't, if you do something that
Mm-hmm.
offends me, i'm not going to I'm not going to tolerate that, and that is enough, because everything in my body wants to be that way and say, you don't do that, you don't get to do that, that's not good. It's yeah, I go back and forth about it when I have, especially because it's Asian Heritage Month and there are so many conversations I'm having that are brutal right now, and
So
experiences that
wait,
come up that
wait.
I'm like, oh,
Conversations that are brutal. Are you having them knowingly? Like, are okay, so I guess my question is because yes, if people confronted me with some of the stuff I was dealing with in Tanzania and hearing and having conversations about, if I had that in my daily life here, I would not deal with it as well as I dealt with it there. There, I knew, okay, I'm entering into a space. I am creating a safe space. I need to create this because this is how I'm going to create a relationship and how I'm going to get through to them and how I'm going to learn what they actually need to have me get through to them. So
right,
I was very aware of what I was stepping into. And I kind of had my own procedure to get my mental space in the right scene, to set the scene for myself so that I could do that. It was not something I could do off the cuff. So I
yeah,
guess my question to you is like, do you know you're going into these conversations, or
yeah.
are they popping up?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that's what I realized yesterday. I put it on my Instagram. I was like, advocating, this is part of what advocating is. You go in looking at a group of people and instances that is morally wrong to you, that
Mm.
there, whether it's the music industry, I mean, you see how hard I advocate for the creative industries, for media and
Mm-hmm.
entertainment, for sustainable careers. That's me going in and saying, I know that every day I am open and willing to have a conversation with someone who cannot make minimum wage and pay for their fullest life, or even close to that, or they're engaging in very harmful behavior because of a society that is glamorized insanity. in so many ways. So I have a very strong visceral reaction to that because I've also personally gone through and been and
Hmm.
experienced the detriment that has come from being in a very systemically oppressive, misogynistic, racist, sexist, like everyest industry. Um, and
Yes.
not to I'm this is not my intention is not to compare it with anything else. I'm talking about my lived experience and with the anti-Asian hate crimes that have risen over the last 2 years, and the conversations and the work that I'm doing now
In
with
BC,
in
hugely.
Vancouver as well,
Like,
like 700% rise.
I was like, when I was looking, this is another numbers thing. This is why statistics matter.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they're the only things that matter, but I do think it is really important because, I mean, I've been away for the last couple of years,
yeah,
but in my mind, like I told you, I grew up in Vancouver. I grew up like majority of my friends are Asian, and I just can't imagine
yeah.
a
But
world where
and
my
yet it's
city that's
and
happening.
yes, it's our work. This is, and I just yesterday had a long conversation with someone that was just heartbreaking. And I'm, putting on a show. I'm producing this show with the Vancouver Asian Film Festival and Eliminate Hate. If you do one thing this month, is go and follow Eliminate Hate, because they're the social advocacy arm of the Vancouver Asian Film Festival, and their whole mission is to elevate these voices and
Yeah.
create equality amongst all Asian Canadians who consistently, someone said it on the news yesterday. I can't remember who it was. It was an anchor, or it was someone who was being interviewed, and said, we are constantly having to fight for our right to belong, and we're citizens. You were just, it's just, it's insanity. Anyway, I mean, this is another conversation. But advocacy, that was a great question, because you're like, you're walking into that arena. I live in this arena. That's what my family looks like. I live every day in that arena watching, and same with my music and entertainment and film family. I watch my friends getting completely screwed over, like every day. So I walk in every day steeled, like, yes, in a very different way, but also not. I'm ready to pick up the phone at any time, and it happens all the time. And I yesterday I broke. I had too much. I was like, we're trying to figure this out, all these different little bits and pieces out. And I'm putting on a show. I'm putting on two shows. One of them that I'm in, that is very close to home, and that a lot of people are not going to necessarily understand, or anyway, it is I think this is where advocacy, and where you and I go in, and we have normalized having these conversations over time, and I don't think a lot of people do, and I think it's really time to start.
But
They,
you're right. There's certain things that are more triggering than others. And I think what you're saying is you wear your heart on your sleeve.
that's
Like
my
you
job.
do.
Yeah,
This is you. When I go into those rooms, how do I explain it? I take my personal experiences and I throw them away for a while. I'm very
right.
compartmentalized.
Yeah,
They're gone. So
yeah,
I am not someone who, I mean, I have been raped. And to have these discussions with people about rape was that is why I needed to take the time afterwards and say, like, okay, I need to just put on headphones and disappear from the world. Those were very hard, but I could not go in there as someone who had been raped. I had to go in there as someone who
right.
was just there to be with the kids,
And this is
to
the
be their
this
best friend.
and this is the context, and this is where, to answer your question, like, to come back to you, exactly, that is exactly how we have to do it, because I have to go in and not be like, I don't, especially if someone's telling me about their experience that's happened to them, I don't want to come back in and be like, well, this is what happened to me.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a
But you can't
competition.
do that all the time. You have to create spaces for that. You can't live your whole life like that. Like I can disassociate for a few hours, but I can't live
Yes.
my whole life
No.
disassociated.
Well,
And
this,
you
yeah,
live
you
your
and
whole life, yeah,
I don't know that I mean, I think that, but I
not
think
disassociated in this world, I mean, in the
I
advocacy
I
world.
I live my life in that world, but I think we do it in different ways. I think you are very good at compartmentalizing, um, and creating the safety that works for you, whether it's disassociating, whether it's compartment. You know, I've experienced it. We talked about the miscarriage episode, and I was like, what is, you know, but at the same time, you also know what my mechanisms are. I need to process this. I need to speak at you, and you need to just be like, okay, I'm listening until I've finished venting. And then you're like, here's how it's going to be okay. And that's what I need. And sometimes it's different. And I think that's where, again, you know, this is a very charged episode it's become, but the reality is we have a responsibility to create the safety for other people in order to inspire what change can potentially come about, that is beneficial in a symbiotic way. But we also have that same responsibility to our fire friends, our family, and ourselves to create that in the ways that we need to before we step into the day. Like for me, that's why my morning rituals are so important. I need that before I step into the day sometimes, you know, and I've been missing out on, I haven't been missing out my meditations, but I have on some other things. And I was thinking this morning, I was like, I need that back because it gets hard, you know?
Yeah. You and me both. I just wrote down actually this morning, I made a list of like, okay, these are my rituals that as soon as I hit the ground in Canada, I'm putting these back into motion.
Well, I look forward to that. We'll do a renewed rituals. We should do a renewed rituals roundtable with Kate from Shop Loba.
Yes, she's another ritual girl. I love it.
Okay, well, team, you've been fab. Thank you for walking with us through some tough things. We really appreciate it. And
this is a heavy episode.
It was, yeah. I've got the trigger warning up. And we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, bombshells. In order to continue to elevate, subscribe and don't forget to click that little bell so you can get notified every time we have a new badass brunch. Until next time, stay focused, fierce, and fabulous.